The physical anomaly queen and thickest character ever in Hoyoverse history, Jane Doe, will be dropping in a couple of weeks. But through the 1.1 event, we were blessed with early access to play with Jane and to take a peek at her full kit. So for those of you that are interested in Jane and are thinking whether you should summon for her, I'll be breaking down her full kit, her best team synergies, viable W engines, disk drive sets to build, and ultimately, if you should summon for Jane Doe. Something to just consider is that we unfortunately weren't able to use any characters alongside Jane throughout the event, unlike with Zhu Yuan's early access. So as great as she does look, just know she will be much better when we play other characters alongside her and with better gear. Just before we jump into it, would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel for more ZenlessZoneZero content and drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Now kicking it off with Jane's kit. Jane, being a physical anomaly DPS character, is capable of dealing an insane amount of damage through her attacks and when triggering assault. A massive aspect of Jane's kit would be her secondary state, being the passion state. Whenever Jane attacks an enemy along with triggering perfect dodges or defensive assists, she will accumulate passion stream, which can be seen with the gauge just below her icon in the top left. When the gauge has been filled completely, Jane enters the passion state, which will increase Jane's physical anomaly buildup by 25%, and if Jane's anomaly proficiency exceeds 120, each point raises her attack by 2 with a max of a 600 flat attack increase. So Jane is capable of buffing her own attack by a significant amount along with increasing her physical anomaly buildup rate, which means you would want to aim in entering the passion state as soon as possible with Jane to deal her maximum damage potential. In regards to a few specifics with the passion state, Jane would consume passion stream whenever she deals a basic attack or skill that deals damage. However, Jane is able to extend the passion state through perfect dodges, defensive assists, and with the Salcho jump attack, where Jane would spin rapidly dealing physical damage. This attack only becomes available once you have entered the passion state and can only be used once each time you enter the passion state. It builds up a decent amount of physical anomaly buildup, but due to the fact that you would be left quite vulnerable whilst using this attack, Jane's anti-interrupt level is increased and will also take 40% reduced damage. So you won't be exactly left open when using this attack and wouldn't be too concerned about taking too much damage, which just makes Jane even more enjoyable to play. So with the passion state, you'll want to dodge whenever you can and trigger defensive assists to help in prolonging the passion state. Now, in addition to the standard method of entering the passion state through building up meter, Jane will also be able to enter the passion state through chain attacks and the ultimate, with gaining max passion stream. So it is essential to allow Jane to attack in those 2-person chain attacks, since she will then be able to enter the passion state immediately. Also, it kinda places more value for there to be a stun character on the team with Jane, as then you would be triggering chain attacks much more often to allow Jane to enter the passion state just as often. So the fact that Jane is able to enter the passion state quite easily other than building up meter is a great aspect of her kit, since it allows you to start dealing insane damage with Jane very soon into the battle. In regards to Jane's EX skill, it deals a good amount of physical damage, where Jane leaps into the air and rapidly spins dealing damage. With Jane's ultimate, along with entering the passion state, the attack itself is a large AoE attack which will deal a great amount of physical damage to all enemies. So when you have grouped enemies together, you would be gaining much more value from the ultimate, as Jane would shred through them. So in terms of Jane's attacks themselves, ranging from the basic attacks to the skill and to the ultimate, they all have insane speed and are very smooth overall. Now with the core skills, both are quite valuable. The first core skill essentially allows Assault to crit on enemies. When Jane attacks an enemy, they would enter the Node state, which lasts for 10 seconds. And if any character on the team triggers Assault on an enemy within the Node state, Flinch would be triggered, which will increase the amount of days enemies receive, along with assault damage having a chance to crit. The crit damage value is fixed to be 50%, but as you upgrade the core skill and for each point of Jane's anomaly proficiency, the crit rate value will be increased further. Unfortunately, we don't have the exact values right now since they weren't disclosed during the event, but at level 4 the fixed crit rate is 23%, and for each point of Jane's anomaly proficiency, the crit rate value would increase by 0.13%. So it should definitely add up to a good amount of crit rate in our full builds. So the amount of value this core skill holds alone is massive, since Assault being triggered already hits like a truck, but now with the ability to crit, it takes it to a whole new level. Additionally, the fact that flinch can be triggered would allow Jane and stun characters especially to trigger chain attacks much more often, which will allow Jane to enter the passion state much more frequently. So again, this core skill is just insanely valuable and I do believe is going to help Jane transcend the anomaly meta. As for the second core skill, when there is another anomaly character or another character of the same faction as Jane, Jane's anomaly build-up rate is increased by 15%. Also, when an enemy already has been inflicted with an attribute anomaly, Jane's anomaly build-up rate towards that enemy will be increased by an additional 15%. So this core skill provides Jane with the flexibility of being able to play alongside any other anomaly character, opposed to having to be played with other physical characters. So the core skill is kinda hinting towards playing Jane with another anomaly DPS to be able to trigger Disorder, which is going to deal an insane amount of damage when paired with the ability to crit with Assault. So Jane as an anomaly DPS character is going to be insane, and it's pretty much given will definitely be the best anomaly DPS character in the game. That is until Burnish drops in 1.2, which could provide Jane with some competition. But Jane is still likely going to remain as the best physical anomaly DPS character for a while. Now as for Jane's team synergies, it should be a given from her core skill that she will want to be played alongside any other anomaly DPS character. With Grace specifically, she is the only other S-rank anomaly DPS character for now and is an amazing character overall. She wouldn't exactly provide anything to Jane through her kit besides activating Jane's core skill and being able to trigger shock pretty quick and quite often, which will then allow Jane to receive a 15% increase in physical anomaly build-up rate. So Jane and Grace would definitely be a strong duo, and then when you have Rina beside them, which can increase the pen ratio of both Grace and Jane so that they ignore a percentage of defense on enemies, along with increasing the duration of shock and electric damage for Grace, it would increase the overall team DPS significantly. So Jane, Grace and Rina would be a powerful team that synergize very well together and is capable of dealing large amounts of damage. Alternatively, Jane, Grace and Seth would also be a great team, since Seth is able to reduce the anomaly build-up rate resistance to all attributes by 20% for 20 seconds through his core skill. This would only be available when there is another character of the same attribute or same faction as Seth, which both would be ticked off being with Jane and Grace. So with Seth on the team, both Jane and Grace would be triggering shock and assault much quicker, which will lead to Disorder also being triggered a lot more often. So it would make Jane, Grace and Seth a strong team, and considering Seth will be on Jane's banner, if you are picking up Jane, it means you would likely be picking up Seth too, which makes this team much more accessible than others. Another great team would consist of Jane, Piper and Lucy. Now Jane and Piper are both physical anomaly DPS characters, so the team wouldn't be able to trigger Disorder as often since Lucy will be required to trigger Burn. But since Jane's first core skill allows any character on the team to crit with Assault just as long as they are in the Nord state, means Piper would work quite nicely since she is still a great anomaly DPS that is capable of triggering Assault quite often. So paired with the off-field damage from Lucy and the 600 flat attack buff she also provides, makes this a great team that also synergizes quite well together. Now she may not be in the game just yet, but Burnish is confirmed to be a fire anomaly DPS character. So it's quite likely Jane and Burnish will also synergize very well together, along with Lucy, which would be perfect since Burnish and Lucy are both fire type and share the same faction. Alternatively, a bit more on the premium side, but Jane, Burnish and Caesar do have potential to work great together, since both Caesar and Burnish share the same faction and Burnish would be triggering Disorder alongside Jane. So these would just be a few teams to consider for later on when Burnish and Caesar drop in 1.2. Now last but not least, moving away from anomaly duo DPS teams, Jiyan, Jane and Nicole do have potential to be a great team, since Jiyan does share the same faction as Jane, which will activate her core skill, and having both Jiyan and Nicole together, they are able to build either anomaly pretty quick, so you would be able to trigger corruption quite often. With Nicole especially, the ability to defend, shred and pull enemies together would hold immense value for Jane, since it would allow her to deal much more damage, and with her ultimate specifically, it will ensure she hits every enemy that is pulled in, which allows Jane to deal damage much more efficiently. So with Jiyan being able to deal an enormous amount of damage herself, and with Nicole defense shredding and crowd controlling enemies, would make a powerful team alongside Jane. Now those are a bunch of teams that Jane would be great on, but she does have an insane amount of team flexibility to synergize with a lot more characters, such as with Nekomata being another physical anomaly DPS to help in triggering assault. Also, there is Changli, which shares the same faction as Jane and will increase the stun damage multiplier by a massive 60%, along with triggering chain attacks more often for Jane to enter the passion state. So Jane is insanely flexible and really has massive potential with the teams you can slot her into. Now as for the viable W engines, as always the signature W engine would provide the most value, and taking Chingli's W engine into consideration being the most recent character, the massive amount of value it provides to Changli might just indicate the same sort of value Jane's W engine would also have. However, we wouldn't know how valuable it is exactly until closer to when Jane drops. So in terms of alternatives, there is only one other S-rank anomaly W engine, being the Fusion Compiler, which has a pen ratio main stat, increases attack by 12%, and when using a special attack or EX special attack, will increase anomaly proficiency by 25 for 8 seconds and can stack up to 3 times, providing a total of 75 anomaly proficiency. So this would be a great alternative due to the sizable increase in DPS from the main stat and the 12% attack increase. Also, with the increase in anomaly proficiency, it will allow Jane to build up physical anomaly much quicker, along with increasing the amount of crit rate for assault. However, since the anomaly proficiency buff has a time limit, this W engine is heavily reliant on Jane using the EX skill very often, which would be something to just bear in mind. As for the A-rank alternatives, first up would be the Weeping Gemini, which is capable of providing a huge 120 anomaly proficiency with the passive and has a main stat of 25% attack. But since it's an A-rank W engine, S5 is definitely achievable for most players, and if you do manage to pull enough dupes for S5, it will provide 184 anomaly proficiency, which is massive. To activate the passive would be through inflicting attribute anomalies on an enemy 4 separate times, and each time provides a stack of anomaly proficiency. Also, when the enemy is stunned or defeated, the stacks of anomaly proficiency are removed. So this W engine would be more suitable for when you are going up against tankier enemies and bosses to be most effective, which there are plenty of, making this a great W engine. Another alternative would be the Rainforest Gourmet, which has an anomaly proficiency main stat and provides an increase in attack by up to a max of 25% at S1. So considering this W engine has an anomaly proficiency main stat, means it will be much easier to keep Jane's anomaly proficiency at a consistent level opposed to being reliant on meeting a condition. The final W engine, which is only available through the Battle Pass, would be the Electro Lip Gloss, which also has an anomaly proficiency main stat and is able to increase attack by up to 10%, along with a damage increase of 15% when there are enemies inflicted with an attribute anomaly on the field. Now the downside to this W engine is that it's heavily reliant on enemies being inflicted with an attribute anomaly, which you will need to ensure to obtain the attack and damage increase. So there are some great alternatives for Jane that are definitely viable if you aren't planning on picking up the signature. Now as for the disc drive sets, there's really only 2 sets to be looking at. The first set would be the Fanged Metal set, as it provides an increase of 10% physical damage, and whenever a squad member inflicts assault on an enemy, it will increase the equipper's damage on that same enemy by 35% for 12 seconds. So if you are going up against tankier enemies, this set would be amazing and will allow Jane to deal some insane damage. The second set would be the Freedom Blue set, as it provides 30 anomaly proficiency along with reducing anomaly build-up res by 20% for 8 seconds when dealing an EX special attack. So if you are maybe struggling to achieve a good amount of anomaly proficiency, this would be a great set and it will make it much easier to trigger assault too. Alternatively, you could use a 2-piece from both the Fanged Metal set and Freedom Blue set if you don't have a solid 4-piece set build for either. Additionally, the Hormone Punk 2-piece can be swapped in for either too, as it will provide an increase in attack by 10%. So there's a few combinations for disc drive sets, but the best two would be either a full 4-piece Fanged Metal set or the Freedom Blue set. As for the main stats, you would want anomaly proficiency for sure on the 4th disc drive, physical damage percentage on the 5th disc drive, and either anomaly mastery or attack percent on the 6th disc drive. In terms of substats, anomaly proficiency would be the most valuable, following on with attack percent, pen, and flat attack. So just like every anomaly DPS, the stats to aim for wouldn't really change. Now as for the ultimate decision of should you summon, personally I do believe anomaly DPS characters are going to be meta for a while in Zenless, and there won't be many instances of insane power creep with anomaly DPS characters. characters. So there wouldn't be another physical anomaly DPS anytime soon to replace or compete with Jane, which means she will have a ton of longevity. Also, anomaly DPS characters just being able to deal lots of damage along with the ability to trigger disorder much more often makes them insanely valuable. So if you aren't convinced just yet to pick up Jane with her more obvious reasons, she will be an amazing character to pick up due to the ability to deal great damage through her abilities, having great team flexibility, and just having a ton of longevity from the unique aspects of her kit. Now, if you aren't interested in the anomaly meta and would prefer DPS characters that focus on the standard crit build, then of course you can skip Jane. Also, if you aren't a fan of Jane's design and would want to wait for another anomaly DPS character like Bernice, then that's fair too. However, we aren't so sure on how great Bernice will be exactly, whereas with Jane we have a pretty good understanding already, so it is completely down to you. But if you do require a strong DPS right now to help in clearing content and will hold value, Jane will be an amazing character to consider picking up. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel for more ZenlessZoneZero content, and if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Also drop a comment down below on whether you will be summoning for Jane or will you be skipping. And yeah, hope to catch you guys later.